The morning I turned 63, I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the sun come up over the backyard. The yard my husband Harold had mowed every Saturday for 31 years. The yard where my daughter learned to ride her bike, where we buried our dog Cooper under the oak tree, where I had planted roses that still came back every spring, even though Harold had been gone for 6 years. I sat there in the quiet, and I thought, this is mine. This is the one thing in my life that is completely, entirely mine. That was 2 years before my daughter and her husband moved in. My name is Dorothy. I am 67 years old. I live in Dayton, Ohio, and I want to tell you what happened inside the house that Harold built, because I think some of you already know this story. Not my story specifically, but the nonium, but the shape of it. The slow, quiet way a person can lose everything without anyone raising their voice. My daughter's name is Renee. She was always the spirited one. Harold used to say she came out of the womb with her hand on her hip. I adored her for it. When she was small, I thought that fire was going to take her somewhere wonderful, and for a while it did. She went to Columbus for college, got a degree in marketing, met a man named Curtis at a work happy hour. Curtis was tall, easy smiling, the kind of man who shook your hand firmly and called you ma'am and made you feel immediately that everything was fine. Everything was not fine. I didn't know that yet. I was just happy she had someone. After Harold passed, I had started to feel the house getting larger at night, the way silence can press against you like something with weight. Renee called every Sunday. She visited at Thanksgiving and Christmas. We were close in the way that mothers and daughters can be close across a distance, warmly, carefully, without too much friction. Then one February, she called on a Tuesday, not Sunday, Tuesday. I knew before I picked up that something was wrong. She said she and Curtis were going through some things. She said the apartment lease was up at the end of the month and the new place they had been planning to rent had fallen through. She said it would only be for a little while, maybe 2 or 3 months. Just until they got back on their feet. She said, "Mom, you have all that space." I did have all that space. 3 bedrooms. Harold's old study that I had never really touched. A finished basement Curtis could use as a workspace. I said yes the way I think a lot of mothers say yes. Not because I thought it all the way through, but because she was my daughter, and she sounded like she was trying not to cry, and I did not know how to be the kind of mother who says no to that sound. They moved in on a Saturday in March with a moving truck, 4 loads, and a dog I had not been told about. The dog was a large, shedding animal named Biscuit, who immediately claimed the couch Harold and I had picked out together at a furniture store in 1987. I told myself it was fine. I told myself a lot of things that year. In the beginning, I want to be honest, it wasn't awful. Renee cooked dinner twice a week. Curtis carried in my groceries without being asked. They were loud in a way that reminded me the house was alive again. I set some boundaries, or what I thought were boundaries. I said I needed quiet before 8 in the morning because I worked the early shift at the dry cleaners on Maple, the one I had been at part-time for 4 years, just enough to keep myself busy and bring in something steady. They said, "Of course, Mom. Absolutely." The first time Curtis left his breakfast dishes in the sink and went back to bed at 10 in the morning, I washed them myself. I told myself he must be tired. The second time, I told myself the same thing. By the 4th month, I had stopped counting. I want you to understand something about the way this kind of situation works, because I think people on the outside look at it and say, "Why didn't you just say something? Why didn't you put your foot down?" And I understand why that seems simple, but when you are inside it, when the person taking advantage of you is someone you have loved since before they could walk, it does not feel like being taken advantage of. It feels like being needed. And after 6 years of Harold being gone, being needed felt like something I hadn't realized I was hungry for. So I kept feeding it. Curtis stopped looking for work around month 5. He said the job market was rough, which it was. He said he had some leads, which I later understood meant he was occasionally scrolling job boards while watching television. Renee was still working remotely for a company in Columbus. She worked from the living room with her laptop and her headset, and on her calls she was sharp and professional, and I was proud of her. But the house, the management of the house, had quietly, completely become mine. I did the grocery shopping. I paid for most of what I bought because Renee said money was tight, and I said I understood. I cleaned the kitchen because no one else seemed to see it getting dirty. I did my own laundry, and eventually, because it was just easier, I started doing theirs too. I vacuumed. I wiped down counters. I scrubbed the bathroom after Curtis's mud from his occasional weekend fishing trips dried into the grout. I was 64 years old, working 4 days a week at the dry cleaners, pressing shirts in a room where the heat never dropped below 90 degrees in the summer, and then coming home to clean a house that 3 adults lived in. I came home smelling like chemicals and steam. My hands dried and cracked from the detergents. I wore compression socks because my ankles swelled by the end of a shift. I would walk in the door at 5:15 and the television would be going and Biscuit would track mud across the kitchen floor and there would be dishes in the sink from lunch and sometimes from breakfast too, and I would put down my purse and start washing them because dinner wasn't going to make itself. The first time Renee said, "Mom, can you run to the store? We're out of creamer." And I had just taken off my shoes. I went. I went because she was my daughter. I went because it was easier than the conversation. I went because somewhere in the back of my mind I still believed that things were temporary, that they were almost on their feet, that the 3 months promise was just slightly delayed. I want to tell you about the night I understood that nothing about this was temporary. It was a Thursday in October, 14 months after they moved in. I had worked a full shift. I came home and the house was warm with the smell of takeout. They had ordered pizza. There were 2 boxes on the counter, and I hadn't been asked if I wanted any. There was 1 piece left in the second box. I was hungry. I took it. Renee came into the kitchen and looked at me holding that slice and said, "Oh, we were saving that for Curtis." She said it the way you'd say it to a house guest. Casually, not meanly, just automatically. Like it hadn't occurred to her to order a pizza for her mother who had been standing in a hot room pressing strangers' linen all day. I put the pizza back. I said I wasn't that hungry anyway. I went to my bedroom. The master bedroom, my bedroom, Harold's and my bedroom, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I held my sore hands in my lap, and I thought about Harold. I thought about what he would have said. Harold was a quiet man, but he had a way of seeing clearly. He would have said, "Dot, you're disappearing in your own house." I wasn't ready to hear that yet, even from his memory. The changes happened so gradually I almost didn't notice them. Almost. One day I came home and the furniture in the living room had been rearranged. Not dramatically. The couch was just turned more toward the TV. Harold's armchair shifted to the corner. But it was my living room. No one had asked me. When I mentioned it, Renee said, I thought it would flow better." And Curtis agreed, and they both looked at me in a way that made me feel like I was being fussy. I let it go. Then Curtis began referring to the house differently. Not to me directly, but I heard him on the phone with someone once, heard him say, "Our place, our house." I stood in the hallway and listened and told myself maybe he just meant it loosely. Then I noticed the mail. There was something new in the mailbox, a credit card statement addressed to Curtis, at my address, then a magazine subscription, then a piece of official-looking mail from a bank, none of it mine. All of it treated like it belonged here, like this was simply where he lived and would continue to live. My neighbor, Paulette, noticed before I fully admitted it to myself. Paulette had lived across the street for 20 years. We watered each other's plants. She watched me one morning getting into my car before sunrise, and she came over that afternoon and sat at my kitchen table, after Renee and Curtis had gone out. And she said, "Dorothy, how long is this going to go on?" I said I wasn't sure what she meant. She looked at me with 20 years of friendship in her eyes, and she said, "You leave for work before the sun comes up. You come home and cook and clean for 2 grown people who do not appear to be making any effort to leave. You are 64 years old, and you are running yourself into the ground in your own home." How long? I didn't have an answer, but that question started something in me, a small, quiet thing, the size of a seed, the temperature of a pilot light. I carried it around for a few months without knowing what to do with it. What finally moved me to act wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There was no screaming, no thrown object. It was something much smaller and, in a way, much sadder. It was a Sunday afternoon in January. I had come back from church. I go every Sunday, had gone every Sunday since Harold passed. I walked in the door, and Renee was on a video call in the living room with a friend of hers from Columbus. I heard her friend ask about the house, commenting on the room behind her, and I heard Renee say, without hesitation, without even lowering her voice, "Yeah, we love it here. It works really well for us. We love it here." Not a word about me. Not "we're staying with my mother," not anything that acknowledged that this was not her house, that she was a guest in a place someone else had built and paid for and watered and grieved inside of. Just, "we love it here." I went to my bedroom and I closed the door and I sat in the same spot I had sat when she'd taken my pizza slice, and I thought, I am not in this house anymore. I am a function of this house. I cook and clean and pay and disappear into my room. And this house that Harold built for us has become something that belongs to my daughter and her husband and their dog, and no one even said thank you. The next Monday I called Paulette and asked her if she still had the number for her lawyer. His name was Mr. Aldridge. He had a small office on 5th Street with framed diplomas on the wall and a tired-looking plant on the windowsill. He listened to everything I told him without interrupting, and when I was done he asked a few questions about whose name was on the deed, whether they paid any rent, whether there was any written agreement. My name? No. He said what I had was called a month-to-month tenancy situation, which meant they had rights, but so did I. He walked me through the process. He told me what to file, what timeline to expect, what to say and not say. He was calm and practical, and he treated me like someone who had every right to be sitting in that chair asking those questions. I walked out of his office and sat in my car for a few minutes. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I want to call it dignity, but it was simpler than that. It was just the feeling of being real again, of mattering in my own story. I had the notice drawn up and delivered properly, the way Mr. Aldridge explained. Renee called me within the hour. She was not calm. She said she couldn't believe I would do this. She said I was being cruel. She said she thought families helped each other. She said, and this is the part that stayed with me the longest, she said, after everything we've been through together. I wanted to ask her which of us had been through what. I wanted to ask her who had cooked her meals and done her laundry and come home smelling like chemicals to a house that was slowly being taken from me room by room. I wanted to say a great many things. Instead, I said, "Renee, I love you, but this is my home. Harold and I built this together, and I am not willing to lose it. I need you to have your own life. I think you need that too." She hung up. Curtis sent me a text 3 days later that said he thought I was making a mistake and that he hoped I would reconsider. I did not respond. The day they moved out, I stayed in the house. I had offered to be elsewhere, but in the end I couldn't make myself leave. This was my home, and I had spent too long retreating from room to room inside it. So I sat in Harold's armchair, which had been moved back to where I wanted it, and I listened to the sounds of boxes being carried and furniture being maneuvered and finally the front door closing. I didn't move for a few minutes after that. I just breathed. Then I got up and I walked through every room. I straightened things. I moved the couch back. I picked up a water glass Curtis had left on the bookshelf, and I washed it and put it away. I opened the windows even though it was February because I wanted fresh air moving through. I stood in the kitchen and I looked at the counters and the stove and the table where Harold and I had eaten breakfast every morning for 31 years, and I said out loud to nobody and to Harold and to myself, "This is mine." Biscuit had left a permanent dent in the couch cushion. I ordered a new cushion cover. It arrived in 5 days. My neighbor Paulette came over that Friday with a bottle of wine and a casserole. We sat at the kitchen table and ate and talked. And for the first time in almost 2 years, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own house. We talked until 10 o'clock, which was later than I'd stayed up in months, and when she left, she hugged me at the door and said she was glad I was back. I told her I was too. A few weeks later, my nephew Marcus called. He's 31, a teacher, recently transferred to a school district closer to Dayton. He needed a place to land while he apartment hunted. He asked very carefully, very formally, whether I would consider renting him the spare room at a fair rate, and he said he completely understood if the answer was no. I told him yes. I told him there were 3 rules. He was responsible for his own laundry, he contributed to groceries, and Sundays before noon were quiet. He shook my hand on it. He moved in 3 weeks later with 2 duffel bags and a box of books. The first week he was here, he fixed the dripping faucet in the guest bathroom that had been dripping for 8 months. He just fixed it, without being asked. Left a note on the counter that said, "I noticed this was bothering the house, so I took care of it. Hope that's okay." I read that note 3 times. I put it in the kitchen drawer where I keep things I want to keep. I still work at the dry cleaners. My hands still crack in the winter. My ankles still swell by the end of a long shift. Those things are just age, and I've made my peace with age. What I haven't made peace with and won't is the feeling of being a ghost inside my own life, of giving and giving until there was nothing left, and no one even noticed the shape of what I had given. I made peace with other things. Renee and I don't speak much. She reached out on my birthday with a text that said, "Happy birthday, Mom. Hope you're well." I said, "Thank you. Hope you're well, too." I don't know if we will find our way back to something more than that. I hope we do. She is my daughter, and I carry that love like I carry Harold's memory. Present, a little painful, always there. But I also know this now. Love is not the same as surrender. I confused those 2 things for a very long time. I thought loving my daughter meant absorbing whatever came, meant making myself smaller so she could be larger, meant handing over the house Harold built so she could tell her friend on a video call that she loved it there. That isn't love. I know that now, what love looks like. Real, healthy, lasting love is what Marcus does. It's fixing a dripping faucet without being asked and leaving a note that says, "Hope that's okay." It's asking whether I want tea when he makes himself a cup. It's coming home to a house where someone sees me, where I am not invisible, where the quiet in the morning is the right kind of quiet. I still sit at the kitchen table with my coffee and watch the sun come up over the backyard. The roses came back again this spring. They always do. Harold's oak tree is taller than ever. Biscuit the dog is gone and the couch cushion is new and the living room is arranged the way I want it. I'm 67 years old and I'm home. And if you are sitting somewhere right now in a house that used to feel like yours, watching yourself disappear room by room, I want you to know that it is not too late. It is not too late to call a lawyer or a Paulette or just yourself into a room and say, "Enough. This is mine. I am still here. You are still here." That is the only place to start, but it is a real place, and it is enough.